Okay. And I will ask Joe McF if you will please lead us in the opening prayer.
Yes, I will. Thank you. So sorry. Moment of silence. We'll invite God into this. Thank you. Our Father, we come to you as a friend. You have said that where 2 or 3 are gathered in your name, there you will be in the midst. We believe you are with us now. We believe this is something you would have us do, and it has your blessing. We believe that you want us to be real partners with you in this business of living, accepting our full responsibility and certain that the rewards will be freedom and growth and happiness. For this, we are grateful. We ask you at all times to guide us, help us daily to come closer to you, and grant us new ways of living our gratitude. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We will start the day with Tim M., who will speak on the subject of serving God. There will be an Ask It basket during this session. Please pose questions and we will filter them up to the top table. Please welcome Tim.
Yay! Rock on, baby.
My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Tim.
I may or may not be speaking on serving God. I'm sure that will come into it. This morning I woke up thinking, what am I going to talk about? Because when you're asked to speak on a topic, you can dial it in. You can read a bit of the book and find things to say and draw on your experience and just say the same old thing that you said last time. I'm sure you've had the experience of listening to an amazing speaker tape and you think, my God, I'm going to listen to every single tape this person, and then it's the same every time. And that's fine, there's a place for that. But I said to God, what shall I talk about? And I tried to fix it myself by going through a bit of chapter 7, thinking, what could I say about this? What could I say about that? But it just felt so sort of pedestrian and boring, and I can do it, but I don't want to do it. And I was talking yesterday or the day before about two-way prayer, about summoning God and thinking that you're going to get answers straight away in the way that you think you're going to get the answers. Now, I did get a couple of answers, so God seemed to answer the prayer. I'm assuming that God did answer the prayer. Maybe these things would have happened anyway, or I would have seen these things that did happen in the same way anyway. But I think the prayer was answered. I was talking to a sponsee. I do lots of sponsee step work in the morning. We read through the book and we talk about it at enormous length. So I did a couple of hours of that this morning. So this is sort of lunchtime for me now. This is not early morning, this is lunchtime. And someone that messages me about twice a year messaged me with a long, complex question. And I thought about it. I spent a little time answering. And I thought, my God, that would be a really good topic for this morning. So I'm going to get onto that. There are some questions down here as well. One of them I've sort of answered in one way before, but I want to answer it a different way. What did you do differently after your slip? Now, that was obviously meant to refer to the last time I drank, but I thought a very common experience as an alcoholic in recovery, trying to live a spiritual life, is that I mess up and I make mistakes and I have challenges and I get off the beam. And I get off the beam even though I'm 31 years sober. It doesn't stop you from getting off the beam. As your life gets bigger and it gets more complicated, there are more obligations in it, there are more opportunities to mess up, there are more responsibilities, there is more riding on the things that one is doing. So of course, one's going to face challenges. And when I lose my mind, should we say, when I lose my mind, what do? The first thing I don't do is think about it and try to solve it by analysis and discussion and all of those things. I treat myself like what Chuck Chamberlain refers to as a babbling idiot. What would someone who is 6 weeks sober, that doesn't know, that can't see in the dark, what would they do? And I think, well, I'll just pretend, just for the sake of the experiment, that the big book has the answer. Okay, let's just pretend. So rather than trying the desperate experiment, talks about the desperate experiment of the first drink, rather than trying the desperate experiment of the first think, I try the desperate experiment of doing exactly what the book says. So when it says, on awakening, we ask God to direct our thinking. And I know there's this very interesting, plain language, big book. I say interesting, I teach a little bit, and sometimes a student says something, I say that's a very interesting answer. And after a few weeks they realise this isn't a compliment. And now, plain language big book, some of it is weird and convoluted, I'll grant you that. Some passages in We Agnostics are brilliant, but there is a lot in some of the sentences, and I think it does bear some explaining, and I understand why people struggle to understand it. And if you don't know what being boiled as an owl is, and if you don't know who Walter Hagen is, and if you don't know what a ticket is, and X, Y, Z, A, B, C, 1, 2, if you don't know what those are, that passage is going to be a mystery. There are things which are genuinely mysterious and need to be explained. On that subject, I mean, I would say I sponsor people all the way through from people that have had real trouble at school, reading and writing and learning, and we have to do the steps and go through the book one way. I sponsor people with PhDs, and I don't find the PhD people more able to understand what the words are actually saying. They're actually more likely to project onto the text something that isn't there. The people in the middle do just fine. But the problems exist all the way up. It's not an education problem, it's an ego problem. It's a being unable to set aside one's own prejudices to actually read what is being said. In the same way on the phone to sponsees, you realise they've completely misunderstood what you've said. Sometimes I have a WhatsApp conversation with someone where someone goes off the deep end in reaction, and it's very clear they literally did not read the words that were said, and we have a fascinating conversation about reading. And these are people who are highly educated. The problem is not that the book is not comprehensible. Most of it is perfectly comprehensible. So we ask God to direct our thinking. Let's see if this needs to be made more simple. What you do, you say, God, please direct my thinking. That's it. There's no secret. It's not difficult. So when I'm having a very bad time, I start on page 86. God, please direct my thinking. I consider my plans for the day. I do all of the other things on there. I do the step 11 review. And just one little thing on that. This is what I mean about reading what is there. This nightly review, when we retire at night, people will call it doing my step 10. My step 10 belongs to me. Doing my step 10 or my step 10s. And it's in step 11 in the book. It couldn't be clearer. It comes after the beginning of step 11. Anyway. But it's so interesting. You see, I think you can do the steps wrong by not doing what it says. by doing something different than what it says, and by doing something more than what it says. And doing more is just as dangerous sometimes as doing less or doing different. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day with pen and paper. No, it doesn't say that. It's interesting. I have met so many people, and I have been the person who has become profoundly disillusioned with steps 10 and 11, particularly step 11, because I got tired of writing out all of my unhappinesses of the day and then getting someone else to pour over my unhappinesses of the day and thinking I'm writing the same thing day after day and keeping it in a book where you get to see what the horror of yesterday was. As you're writing today, you've got yesterday's horror still there. You know, you didn't flush. It's still there. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? That's a tick box. Were we those things? It doesn't say elaborate at great length. The problem when I'm resentful is the fact that I'm resentful. It is not what I'm resentful about, it is the fact that I'm permitting it. On page 66, it says about resentment, to the extent that we permit these. And one of my favourite phrases, my friend Ivana, I wonder if she'll hear this one day. My friend Ivana, and she won't mind me saying this, would phone up and say, I'm full of resentment. As though she's a pot that someone else has poured the resentment in, and she's noticed that she's been filled up with resentment, as though someone else... It's very... I learn more in sponsee conversations from how people say things, not what they're saying. You'll look past the content they want to deliver to the content they're really delivering by how they're expressing things. I am full of resentment. Well, how'd you get that way? Permission. I granted myself permission to dwell on things I find disagreeable for so long. My whole consciousness became filled with. So let's rephrase that. And then you can start to solve the problem. You have to know what the problem is before you can start to solve it. So the problem with resentment is not the object. It is not the thing the narrative is about, which is why talking about the thing that it appears to be about is a waste of time, because it's a distraction from the fact, from the real problem, which is that I've been permitting it. So when I do this, was I resentful? The question is really, to what extent did I permit grumbling, complaining, moaning thoughts during the course of the day? The content of those thoughts is neither here nor there. Because if you're resentful at Sally, because she's got the hump and she's giving you the cold shoulder, what is the answer? This is a sick man, how can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry, thy will be done. Very good. Okay. Now you're upset with the government because of its tax policies or something. What is the answer? This is a sick man, how can I be helpful to him? God, and you discover, whoever it is, whatever it is, the answer is the same. It's not about the content. In southern Italy, and in other places too, I guess in Mexico, hot countries, outdoors, little villages wouldn't have their own cinemas in the 30s, 40s, 50s. They wouldn't have their own cinemas. What they'd have is the big white church wall onto which the film was projected, and everyone in the village would gather around and watch the film of the week projected onto the wall. And you're watching the film on the wall. But only a fool in that situation thinks the film is coming from the wall, coming from inside the wall. You know it's being projected. Whenever I'm resentful, I've decided to be angry and I've found a situation which seems to fit, then I'm talking about the situation like the situation has caused the resentment, and it hasn't. Have you noticed with resentment, the feeling is the same pretty much, regardless of the cause? This is a clue that it is not about the cause. And a really good contrast is I notice this particularly with classical music. You listen to 10 different pieces by Beethoven, and then you listen to some Brahms, then you listen to some Mozart, then you listen to some Haydn, then you listen to some Shostakovich, and then you ask yourself, what do I feel? And you feel something very, very different each time. And when I have a resentment, I'm feeling the same thing each time. And there's a funny little thing which goes around in AA about, I can't just look past my resentments. I'm just suppressing my feelings. I need to be authentic to my feelings. Resentment isn't a feeling, it's an interference with feeling. It shuts down any sensitivity to the actual world and just fills me with this kind of dull. That's not a feeling, it's a loud noise, which is stopping me from living. I'm not being authentic by paying attention to that feeling. It's the enemy. It's not my ego is not my amigo. So were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Yes, 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 and yes. Later on it's going to say, what are my corrective measures? And that's the point of the review, is to flip so quickly to the corrective measures, I don't have time to get bogged down in the detail. In the old people's home that my elderly mother lived in for a few years before she died, God rest her soul, once they replaced the carpets, and there was a little period where they put down this kind of sticky base layer, which something was going to be adhered to, some second base layer was going to be adhered to, but there was this sticky substance all over the surface, and you could walk on it, but you had to keep going. If you stopped, your shoe would really get stuck to it, but if you kept walking, you were okay. And it's like that with these feelings. I've got to keep walking. If I keep walking and don't dwell, I'm going to be fine. So when I'm in crisis, I just do what an idiot newcomer would do, because in that moment, once I'm separated from God, I've got to first of all get back to God. And when my sanity is restored, it's so interesting. I won't be able to find the page. Let's see if I can find the page. What's the Mayflower page? In chapter 11. It's 150. There it is, 154. When Bill Wilson, 1935, June, goes to Akron to do a deal. The deal is going south. He's in the Mayflower Hotel. He's starting to toy with the idea of a drink. There's a bar. He sees people chattering away. And the order of this is so interesting. Of course, he couldn't drink, but why not sit hopefully at a table, a bottle of ginger ale before him? Ale is normally an alcoholic drink. After all, had he not been sober 6 months now? Perhaps he could handle, say, 3 drinks, no more. Fear gripped him. Now, what's so interesting is the comparison between that and Fred's story on 41. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. So Fred did not have an emotional reaction to the thought of a drink, whereas Bill, fear gripped him. That's a pretty strong statement. That's like the revulsion that rises up in you at the thought of a drink in step 10. It's very interesting. And he'd been working with people for 6 months, but failing in inverted commas, because none of them got sober. But what that work for 6 months produced was an automated response. Notice, he didn't think it through and generate fear. Fear gripped him, you can't make the fear come to you in that moment. If it comes to you, this is the operation of a power greater than yourself. Fear gripped him. He was on thin ice. And that's an interesting... I go through this book with a lot of people, and every single line, I should stop saying, I say, that's interesting. I find literally every line interesting. That's how dull I am after 31 years. I'm still finding this interesting. I know a teacher of the Course in Miracles, and he's been doing it for 45 years, and his family say, you're still reading that book? Like, haven't you finished it yet? Apparently not. He was on thin ice. I once saw a film about Russia. Actually, once lived in Russia, but that's another story. I saw a film about Russia where someone fell through the ice and the current caught them, and they were sliding with the current underneath the ice, trying to scratch to get a grip on the underside of the ice, but the underside of the ice is slippery, and someone was running over the top, and they could see them sliding in the water underneath. And this is the experience when someone slips on thin ice, falls through the ice, the current, the physical craving catches them, and you can watch them, you can run parallel to their slipping with the current. You are in charge of your running, they are not in charge of what the current is doing with them. You're in a fundamentally asymmetrical situation, even though they're in front of you. And to understand that lack of symmetry of what you're doing and what they're doing, that explains why you get so frustrated trying to get through to them. It's because you can't get through to them. It's already too late. By the time they've had the drink, it's too late. And the point of no return is way before you think the point of no return is. That's with a slip, and that is with the progression of alcoholism. All the way through the early chapters, it talks about how the desperate state of being unable to stay away from the first drink based on knowledge and experience, that condition has arisen way before you realise it's arisen. He was on thin ice. Again, it was the old insidious insanity, that first drink. So he recognises what is going on. It's going to say on pages 58 and 59, cunning, baffling, powerful. Here, it's not cunning enough to have fooled him. He can see what is going on, but it is still powerful. With a shiver, he turned away. So the first thing he does in response to, so fear gripped him, shiver. It's very like the visceral reaction of a great revulsion rising up inside. We recoil from it as if from a hot flame, these automated reactions. You don't decide. If you've ever burned yourself on a stove, when you retract your hand, you're not saying, my hand feels strangely hot. I wonder why. It is because the stove is on. What shall I do? Oh, I could do lots of things. I think I'll retract my hand. No, you just, oh. You better hope in that moment the preparation in the previous 6 months has been such as to produce that automated reaction which is beyond the will. It's not an act of the will. With a shiver, he turned away and walked down. With what? His body. So he's learnt to take the right action, not to think about it. Music and gay chatter still floated to him from the bar. He walked down the lobby to the, we think we know the book, church directory. I didn't say there was going to be a pop quiz, so it's not fair. The church, what's the first thing he does? Try to contact someone else to talk about God. So he doesn't analyse his problem. He goes straight to God. How do you get to God? Church directory. He doesn't get his meditation cushion or centre himself or watch his breathing or let his thoughts float past like clouds in a peaceful sky. Now, he's taking the right action And the alcoholism is still talking to him. Music and gay chatter still floated to him from the bar. He's, in other words, now that would have been the case anyway, but he's noticing that. He's still aware of the pull of the alcohol, yet he's doing the right thing anyway. We need to exert will here. The book is very clear at various points that God will do for us what we cannot do for ourselves, but won't do for us what we can do for ourselves. And he's given us a will, not for that will to be nullified, but to be brought into alignment with God's will. So it's not that my will is a bad thing. It's been pointed in the wrong direction. I've listened to the voice of the ego and pointed the will in that direction. So I need to listen to what God wants me to do and point my will in that direction. And then, but what about his responsibilities? His family and the men who would die because they would not know how to get well are, yes, those other alcoholics. There must be many such in this town. So he's not yet at the telephone directory, and already these thoughts are naturally occurring to him. What's very interesting in Jim's story on page 35, 36, it says something about his family that was reassembled. He has a charming wife and family. But suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. He's not even thinking about his wife and family. That's the key thing there. He is concerned with himself. He's been practicing being concerned with himself. If you read the narrative before that, there's nothing to indicate the onset of madness in Jim, but every single statement is about himself. I came to work. I remember I had to be a salesman. I had a few words. Then I decided on the way I felt. I had no intention. I just thought. I also had. I.
Wow.
It's very interesting. To me. Whereas Bill has been practicing thinking of others. So when the crisis arises, he automatically thinks of others. And I know someone, we don't care much for each other, but nor for that. One of the things he says, AA is like military training. Yeah, you might want to, thank you. AA is like military training. The point of the military training is so that when you're under fire, the training kicks in, you do what you've been trained to do, even though you're terrified and confused, and with the din of battle and all of those things, that you automatically do the right thing. So I've got to be in training as though this moment could arise at literally any time. And that's how AA works. There must be many such alcoholics in this town. He would phone a clergyman. His sanity returned. Note that the sanity returned after he takes action, not before he takes action. Josh, could you ask him to stop doing that for a bit?
I did.
Okay. Could you make sure it happens? Thank you. Very good. Now, the point of all that is to say that when I'm in a crisis, I don't solve the crisis by thinking about it, by separating myself. I start taking actions that I've been directed to take, real basic actions that anyone can take. The equivalent of going and phoning the clergyman is go to a meeting and find an alcoholic, return some phone calls, call people in my family who I owe calls to and ask them how their day was. Take action first, then sanity returns. Once the sanity is returned, then I can do the inventory. Inventory doesn't come first here in those crisis situations. I need to be restored to sanity first. And there was a very interesting question, actually a couple of points. I was talking to a sponsor this morning about a line on page, where is it? 35. It says, so we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. And what it's going to describe, you've got Jim's story, and Jim is having a perfectly normal day, and then boom, thought of a drink, he drinks. Fred is having a sensational day, and the thought of a drink occurs, and boom, he drinks. And then it talks about people who drink deliberately, pressing the so-called F it button. It doesn't say that, but that's effectively what it's saying. Then it talks about people who don't think at all, who are not even considering it, and they just find themselves drunk. And then it talks about the curious mental phenomenon that, parallel with our sound reasoning, ran some insanely trivial excuse for a drink. So what it's saying, the mental states that precede the first drink are having a great day, having an okay day, having a bad day, drinking on purpose, not even thinking about drinking, and having two or more thoughts in your mind at once. So as long as you avoid all of those, you're okay. And you realise, when you look at the mental states that precede the first drink, there is nothing they all have in common. And it's so interesting that the man of 30 was not restless, irritable, and discontent when he relapsed. Roland Hazard on pages 26, 27 was not restless, irritable, and discontent before he relapsed. Jim had been a little irritated, but just regular irritation. He wasn't in this kind of permanent state of restlessness, irritability, and discontentment. Jim was having a sensational day. He wasn't restless, irritable, and discontented. So what is the point of Dr. Silkworth saying restless, irritable, and discontented? I'll tell you my experience. Grady DOH, who I mentioned before, my favourite, just my hands down favourite AA speaker. I'm the only person that thinks she's the best. But so give her a go, but she's amazing. One thing she said, I never had the obsession to drink or the craving to drink, because to be aware of either of those, you've got to not give in to the thought. If you try to resist it, it will obsess you until you do it. With the craving, if you're sitting there with a bottle of whiskey, and whiskey wasn't my drink, gin was my drink. I'm sitting there with a gin, and I have a craving for another one. I don't realise I'm having a craving. I realise, oh, there's a gin there, I'll have another one. Like, I'll have another one. You know, with a cigarette, when you're smoking a cigarette and you accidentally light a second one, just because it's somehow not hitting the mark, so you light another cigarette, and you realise you've got 2 cigarettes now. What am I going to do with 2 cigarettes? So you kind of play a game with them, and give each of them a chance. You know, it wouldn't be fair to pick one and reject the other, so you just alternate until they're both gone. It's completely automatic. If you resist it, it will torture you until you give in. And that's the... Restless, irritable, and discontent is not a generalized description of unhappiness. It's a very specific feeling. It's the feeling of someone that is trying to resist a drink. And now it makes sense. The thought of a drink occurs. The people seeing Silkworth are seeing him because they are desperate to stop. They are doing everything within their power under Silkworth's care to stop, but they don't have AA, and they keep failing. They're putting everything into it. They're probably paying him a lot of money, which means it's worth, so it wasn't free healthcare. They were paying lots of money, so these people were really serious. and they were desperately trying not to drink, but the obsession was on them. They weren't getting any spiritual relief. That's the condition of restless, irritable discontent. It is when the alcoholism has already hit, but you're not giving into it. But the thing is, if it hits and you give into it, that's the end of it. You might not even get as far as restless, irritable discontent. You might just get drunk. Half measures avail us nothing. The result was nil until we let go absolutely. What's nil? Drunk. And by the way, with the half measures thing, I'll say to sponsees who are doing half measures, don't even bother. Just save yourself the effort, because all you're doing is you're poisoning yourself against AA. Just stop it. Wait till you're entirely willing, until you're so desperate you don't need to be told. And I had a phone call with someone this morning, and this is a very common, now it's sort of unfair to mention it, I'm not going to say who it is obviously, but this is an incredibly common conversation. I've had this conversation 100 times. Someone phones up, I answer the phone, I say, good morning, fire away, which means whatever you got prepared to say, let's get on with it. And there was a long silence as the person was waiting for me to manage the call. When I went into an off-license to buy, that's our word for a place you buy alcohol. When I went into an off-license to buy alcohol, I did not wait there at the counter for the person to ask me what I wanted. I've never heard of anyone phoning up their dealer and just sitting there in silence waiting for the dealer to say, is there anything I can help you with today, sir? There is an impatience and a desperation. And you don't care about the other person's feelings. That's what I want to see. I'd much rather have a sponsor that doesn't give a flying F about how I feel, but just wants to, listen, I have 8 problems I want to talk about. Here's the first one. I like that, I can work with that. But I won't have someone else outsource the responsibility for enthusiasm to me. It is not my responsibility to be enthusiastic on the part of a lackluster alcoholic. Wait till you're, as my friend Tom says about Al-Anon, wait until you're holed out as long as you can before going to your first Al-Anon meeting. Unless you're completely desperate, if you go, it'll just get on your nerves. The knitting alone will drive you nuts. If you're desperate, you won't care that they're knitting. Yeah. You won't care at the chaos and the incompetence and all of the other things that happen in meetings. It doesn't matter. If you're desperate, it doesn't matter. So get desperate. And the way you get desperate is by considering the mental states that precede the relapse, realizing that none of them have anything in common with each other, that there's this line from a song, just what you least expected, just when you least expected it, or something. To be on guard for the unguarded moment. Talks in the book about falling between the commas at certain times. We are unable to bring to mind with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and the humiliation. Because you don't know when that's going to happen. It could happen later today, it could happen in 20 years' time, but it's going to come. So you need to be prepared, and the way you get prepared is not by preparing, as it were, for the moment, but by establishing a relationship with God, so that in that moment, you get that automatic revulsion. The question that someone sent me this morning, which I thought was just so brilliant because it's complicated, there are lots of moving parts to it, but it's one that almost everyone goes through at some point in their recovery. What they said, approximately, I'm not going to read out the actual message, they said they were angry at God and religion. I know that's not a problem that anyone has here in Tulsa. Angry at God and religion, angry at the notion that there might be a divine plan, saying that during their drinking, things happened that weren't their fault, things that happened that they didn't deserve, And they can't believe that God would actively plan for bad things to happen. How can there be a good God who plans for bad things to happen? And what drew this person's attention to this issue was that line in Acceptance is the Answer, which used to be Dr. Alcoholic Addict. Nothing happens in God's world by mistake. And this gets quoted a lot. People often say it's their favourite story in the book and it's the favourite passage, and it gets quoted at a lot of meetings. And people often quote the line, nothing happens by mistake, but they very rarely explain what is meant by that. And this person, who's very young, early 20s, has accidentally discovered there's a whole domain of theology which focuses on the question, so I'm sure you'll know, of how can there be a God who is good and omnipotent? How can there be a God who can do anything and yet allows suffering in the world? It's the oldest question. So the book of Job and the Psalms are riddled with this question: how can God be good and omnipotent? If he's omnipotent, he could step in and stop all sorts of things from happening, but he doesn't. And if he's good, maybe he wants to, but he can't step in. So he's not omnipotent. So God can't, this is the question that is posed, God can't be good and omnipotent. And as I say, it's a whole domain of theology and philosophy, so people have been writing and thinking about this for thousands of years, literally. Now, what's not helpful is to simply take the question, answer it, well, there is no God, I'm going to get on with my day. And it's not satisfactory. Now, if you don't need God, that's maybe satisfactory. You might say, well, I can't be bothered with the question. But if you're trying to establish a relationship with God, I don't think I know anyone that hasn't had to deal with this question at some point. And particularly as your attention is drawn to it by people trotting out the acceptance passage the whole time. So I got an awful lot of sympathy for this person's position, but the answer to the question, I think, has two parts. The first part is where the person started is, I'm angry. So this is not an abstract theological question. I've been musing about the nature of God and God's various characteristics, and I've noticed a little problem. This person's angry. So the first thing that needs to be treated is the anger. Yeah. And when I was angry at God, as everyone who is honest will be at some point, I was told, if you can't handle theology without getting all riled up, leave it to people who are better able to do that. Wait till you've got some more emotional maturity and then start to address theological questions. You're trying to play with the big boys and you don't have the whatever to do it. You don't have the skill to do it. To look at this question without getting all hot and bothered. You need a cool head for that question. This question about how can there be a God who is good and yet omnipotent. So the first thing to do is to get rid of the anger and say, let's slim things down, let's make things real simple for a little while and just consider one's own higher power. So rather than trying to consider God in totality, how about you just keep it as simple as, God, show me what to do today, God, give me whatever I need to take care of such problems, page 87, and we thank him from the bottom of our heart that we know him better, page 75, which is a good response to all sorts of situations, not just step 5. Stick to that, and then start to see God in lots of little things, in your interactions with other people. But you can give some entry-level answers to this question, which can really start to help straight away. Now, the bigger question, I'll come to it if there's time, there probably won't be. The There are lots of very good books. One of the questions is about what useful books are there. So on page 87, it's going to say, ask your priest, rabbi, or minister for reading suggestions. Make use of what religious people have to offer. Be quick to see where religious people are right. There's commentaries on the book of Job are very good on this question. Rabbi Harold Kushner writes about this question with a book which is helpfully entitled "Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People?" That's a title you know what the book is going to be about. It's not mysterious. And also C.S. Lewis, who I can't recommend enough, wrote a book called The Problem of Pain, which addresses this, not as a theologian, but just as a regular person. Well, he says he's a regular person just examining the question, not as a professional theologian. He's a little bit more than a regular person. But he discusses this at enormous length, and it's very, very enlightening. It's very, very helpful. But let's look at the content here, because the content is brilliant, and I just identified with every line. So I'll talk about myself. Things happened to me that weren't my fault. Now, this person said during their drinking, well, sure, things happened to me during my drinking that weren't my fault. But things certainly happened to me during my childhood that weren't my fault. There are things over which I have no agency. A very common thing I've heard in recovery, and I said it for years, when I was a child, I was taught that ... I was taught that I was worthless, for instance. And I had to stop saying things like that. I met a lot of people when I was a child. There were my parents, there were people in my family, there were lots of other children, there were teachers, there were various other adults. Now, if I point to a particular thing that one of them said, and said, as a child, I was taught that, well, that was one of the things I heard. What else did I hear and overlook? Something in me chose those lessons to learn. And the signal example in my own case is my dear old mother was, I think the polite word is neurotic. And my father was happy-go-lucky. Now, there is a good side to neurotic, which meant things got done and they got done well. But there's a bad side to neurotic. My father was happy-go-lucky. That's great unless you need something doing, in which case you can whistle for it. So there are good and bad sides to both. But I had these two examples. My mother, my father, my mother, my father, my mother, my... Who did I become like? I became like my mother, neurotic. Now, either I'm just built like that, in which case she is not to blame for teaching you that lesson. Or I chose it because there were other options there. There were lots of people looking back who taught me very, very good lessons that as a child, apparently, I was uninterested in learning. At the age of 8, I went to a Bible thing for a few weeks, and you had to learn Bible verses, and you got little slips of paper for learning them off by heart, and then there were prizes you can cash them in for, and I was good at that. And I even remember going into a tent at a country fair where you accepted Jesus into your heart. They didn't really tell you what to do after that, but I did that. And that was at the age of 8 or 9, but I didn't follow it up. I could have, but I didn't. That's interesting. The option was there. The church was there. Did I go? No. Was I allowed to go? I could have gone, but I didn't. No one made that decision for me. So these lessons I learned as a child, I was either the lesson was already programmed into me in my DNA, or it was chosen above all the others. Yeah, so bad things happened during my childhood. But even on the days that bad things happened, there were lots of good things that happened too. Yeah. And my childhood is a catalogue of a few very, very bad things and a lot of neutral things and an awful lot of good things. And I remember talking to someone about their childhood, a woman who was very, very bitter about her parents because she said she was neglected. And I said, okay, what form did the neglect take? And there were some things which were, a couple of things which were despicable and other things which were not great, shall we say. But I said, did they house you? Yes. Every day, did you have a roof over your head every day of your childhood? Yes. Did you have a school to go to? Yes. Were you given all the things you needed to go to the school? The clothes and the books and the pencils and the pencil sharpeners and the other? Yes. Did you have your own room growing up? Yes. Did you ever go hungry? No. Did you ever get encouragement from either of your parents? Yes. Were you ever allowed by your parents to do things you enjoyed? Yes. Did they encourage you to engage in X, Y, and Z, various hobbies? Yes. And I said, I want you to make a list of every single thing that they did right, because this was the exercise given to me. Make a list of every single thing they did right. As an adult, I am responsible for the life that I have. As a child, less so. I don't know how I would sponsor someone that was 14, but luckily I don't sponsor people who are 14. But you reach majority and you're now responsible. So the people in my life, I've chosen. And as an old friend of mine said, the destination is printed clearly on the ticket. I chose, if I live with someone, that's the person I chose out of the tens of thousands of people I've ever encountered. Something in me chose them. No one is to blame for me having chosen them. And the question is, what are the choices I'm making and why? Things that I didn't deserve was one of the lines. Of course, no one deserves ill treatment. But all the people that I've treated ill didn't deserve it either. So I'm not one to throw stones about deserving. Nothing happens in God's world by mistake. I think there is a simple, kind of quick, as they say in business, a quick and dirty solution to the problem. An idea, and I always get the terminology wrong, so forgive me. There's the notion of God's perfect will, which is the things that God actively wants, people's happiness, people's thriving, people to have a relationship with Him, all of that. Marigolds growing and birds singing and things like that, good things, sunsets. And then there's God's permitted will, which is stuff that God doesn't particularly like, but God is permitting to happen. And one of the answers, and so hence nothing is by mistake, because everything is either permitted or it's willed. Now you say, well, how could God permit terrible things? The answer which has worked for me, and it's not a complete answer, as I said, so it's a quick and dirty answer to get you through the day. And I get this from C.S. Lewis and from some other people as well. If you're going to have a material world with all of the wonderful fun things, if you're going to have life, you've got to have death. If you've got an up, there's got to be a down. It runs according to certain rules. If I were to jump out of a window and hit the concrete, I'm not being punished by the concrete. That's just the rules of gravity and the rules of matter and the rules of anatomy and the rules of all sorts of things. The system is set up with risk inherent in it. And sometimes I'm at the business end of that risk and sometimes I'm not. And then for people to have free will, for that free will to be real, people have got to be able to do bad things. And that accounts for 99% of all of the suffering, is that either this is just the laws of physics combined with the luck of the draw. People say, why me? The answer is, why not? I was taught that in very early AA. Because your experience, it's how you play the cards that are dealt. It is not the cards that are dealt. It is how you play them that matters. how you respond to them will dictate your experience of those things. You have people, I've known people, wonderful people in AA, who go through cancer without a complaint. I can't go through breaking a fingernail without a complaint. There are the examples if I want to learn them. And I've seen people go through the most appalling things in AA and find blessings and joy and cheerfulness in every single day, even though they're in physical pain or in some other form of pain. Pain and joy are not opposites. They can absolutely coexist at the same time. And the pain then stops being suffering. It becomes simply one of the instruments of the orchestra. There's nothing wrong with pain. Suffering is unnecessary, but pain is part of the picture. 99% of things seem to boil down to this is the way the material world was set up, or people get to make very bad decisions, and because we're all in relationship with each other, sometimes I'm at the business end of those bad decisions. But then there's the so-called butterfly effect. Little things can have very big consequences. But that works. There's a Suzanne Vega line, a careless match in a very dry field. Imagine throwing a lit match into a field, the whole field goes up. Lots of my harms were like that. I did a small thing which had a very big impact. A little bit of gossip and it goes around. But blessings work like that as well. So part of the design is that the opportunities were there the whole time. People talk, I'm going to finish on this, people talk about the seconds and inches, that and Clancy, I understand his point, talking about the moment that AA hung on a thread because Bill was about to give up the pursuit of trying to carry the message to alcoholics because no one was getting sober. And he said, no one's staying sober. And then Lois says, but you are staying sober. And he went, oh, that's why I'm doing it. And Clancy says, your fate and mine hung on a thread in that moment. If anyone remembers Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the deal in Buffy was that there are lots of evil forces and vampires and other stuff, and there is one defender against all of these on the whole planet, and it's a vampire slayer. And when one of them is killed, another one who is lined up in preparation, like they're called potentials, of which there are thousands everywhere. There are potentials all lined up to take her place. If the vampire slayer is killed, another girl is upgraded to being a vampire slayer. In the story of, I heard this the other day, story of Esther in the Bible, which I haven't read recently, but so Haman was going to kill all the Jews, and Esther, Jewish, living in Haman's court. I hope I'm getting the details right. Living in Haman's court, and Mordecai says to her, "You've got a position of influence here. You need to do something to stop this happening, and only you can do it. You're in prime position." And Esther's like, "I really don't want to do this. This is too hard." And Mordecai says, "Look, if you don't do this, the Jews are going to be fine because God will find another way. But you're not going to be fine." So AA doesn't need me, but I need AA. I need to step up to the plate and fulfill my obligations in AA. If I don't, someone else will fill in for me. But I won't be okay if I don't do that, which is why I continue to do my duty in AA. Thanks for listening.
Woo!
Thank you so much, Tim, again. We will now have a break until 10:45.
Let's make it 10:30.
10:30. Please help me close with the Lord's Prayer, and we can remain where we're sitting or standing. Our Father,
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Can I please ask the Zoom host to stop recording?
You know what I was thinking about?
Let's please start with the Serenity Prayer.
Hang on, can you?
Oh.